Please welcome our next session's moderator, Yavar Shah, former chairman of the board of SWIFT, joined by panelists Lindsay Argalas, CEO of TaxBit, Tom Hook, global head of compliance for PayPal's blockchain, crypto and digital currencies business unit, and Hussein Ahmed, founder and CEO of Limited.
Good morning, everybody. I can see that there's a lot of networking going on. So with that, welcome to the panel on compliance best practices. So what we're going to do with this distinguished panel is we're going to start with each of them introducing themselves and their company and what they do very briefly. Then we will talk about why compliance is important from their perspective. Then we're going to get to the meat. How are they managing the world of compliance, including KYC, AML, sanction screening, etc. And that's the idea today. So with that, let me turn it over to Lindsay with that.
All right, thanks, Yara. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. So I am Lindsay Argalas. I'm the CEO of TaxBit, the leading tax and accounting software for digital asset compliance. I've spent most of the last 20 years in fintech, software, and payments. And prior to TaxBit, I was a member of the executive committee of a very large global bank. And so it is really at my time at Santander where I developed conviction around blockchain technology, the promise of digital assets, particularly in global money movement. And that's also where I developed an appreciation for the importance of compliance, right? Doing things in a regulated financial institution is a very different story. And so also developed empathy for the burden of compliance as well. So that is what led me to TaxBit and here to the discussion today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Now, Tom, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Tom Hook. I'm the Global Chief Compliance Officer for MoonPay. For those of you who don't know, MoonPay is probably the largest on and off ramp in crypto, but recently with our acquisitions and partnerships with MasterCard, we're very much moving into the payments infrastructure space. So very excited to work there. I oversee their global compliance and risk program across all products and services globally. In my spare time, I'm also an adjunct professor at Boston University Law School, where I teach courses in crypto regulation and payment systems. Crypto regulation courses very much about how there is regulation. It's the biggest thing I try and get the students to take away. And in my background, I'm an attorney. I started my career right here in Manhattan as an assistant district attorney and worked in traditional finance. This is my third crypto company. I previously worked at Circle, overseeing their AML program, and was the US CCO at Bitstamp. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Tom. Larry, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone, Larry Wade. I head up global risk and compliance for PayPal's blockchain, crypto, and digital currency group, which also includes our cross-border payments business. I'm also head of global compliance for our corporate staff areas at PayPal, so finance, legal, human resources, real estate, et cetera. My remit, regulatory relations for all virtual currency business activity for PayPal, ensuring that we're adhering to the enterprise risk management policies and procedures. What local regulatory regimes and global regulatory regimes do we need to adhere to or get ready for as we continue to launch products? The strategy, where it's, hey, how do we do something we've never done before, where we're this regulated fintech, and we cannot kind of contaminate the mothership business. So those are the things that kind of keep me up at night and kind of keep me engaged and employed as well. Prior to this, I was a management consultant specializing in all three lines of defense, in Sarbanes-Oxley, reg remediation, methodology, et cetera. So risk management geek.
Thank you, Larry. Over to you, Hussein.
Thank you, Anwar. Hi, everybody. My name is Hussein. I'm the founder and CEO of Limited, which is a global neobank based out of San Francisco and operating globally, back to Larry's point as well. Before Limited, actually, is the founding CEO of Oxygen Bank in the US as well, which is a digital bank, was serving 1.2 million customers or so in the US here as well. I think with Limited being also on-chain now kind of thing, you kind of from day one you're operating globally, being like on stablecoin / crypto versus being like within like a limited, like no pun intended, I guess, jurisdiction like the US only kind of thing, versus like coins being like natively global from day one in a sense.
Thank you, Hussein. So now we're going to go a little deeper. We're going to talk about why it is important to have compliance and what is it in that why that makes it meaningful to each one of the panelists. So Lindsay, you first.
Yeah, so first of all, maybe I'll start with kind of our mission at TaxBit and then the role of compliance in that. So we are trying to enable digital assets for the global economy. And we believe that compliance is a critical part for that actually to happen, right? I think we are all here because we believe in the power and the potential, the benefits of stablecoins and digital assets, right? Whether it's the speed, the efficiency, a better customer experience, all of those good things. But in order for digital assets to truly modernize the financial infrastructure, right, it has to work within the framework and be able to interact with the traditional financial system. And so a big part of that is compliance, right? If we think about, cryptocurrencies and digital assets, right? The first 10 or so years was all around crypto as an investment, and kind of experimenting with this new technology, right? The last couple of years, we've seen this huge increase in stablecoins in particular, and that is really, I think, the bridge between traditional financial services and starting to modernize using blockchain technology and integrating with the traditional financial system. Ultimately, we need the large players, right? The Fortune 500, we need the largest payment companies, the large TradFi and banks, right? In order to really revolutionize and start gaining the adoption that we need. And so right now, if you look at like stable coins, right, they're about 3% of cross-border money flows. In the next 5 years, it's expected to get to 20%. The only way that can happen, right, to unlock really the benefits of stable coins is if it's done in a compliant way where there's trust, right? So again, the licensed players, right, that are heavily supervised and regulated, there are very high stakes for them to do it the correct way. For consumers and businesses to engage with stablecoins and digital assets, of course, that is a really important part of it. So I think we've always had, a thesis that digital assets would follow the way of regulation of financial services. Hopefully, I think what you're seeing come into effect is that it is not just taking what has been the case of traditional financial services, but building upon that, right? Doing what is fit for purpose, allowing the innovation to flourish, but at the same time connect to the financial system. So again, I think that unfortunately can't happen without compliance, and that's why we see all of these regulatory frameworks coming into place around the world. We know one of the biggest use cases, of course, is cross-border payments. So that is why the regulatory framework in all of these main jurisdictions is so important to connect the different countries and regions together.
Thank you, Lindsay. So now, I guess I should call you now Professor Hook. Tom,
I'll take it.
Over to you.
Thanks. I think, very much to build on what Lindsay said, I think a lot of what compliance is doing is building trust. And the way that I think about this, and this, this kind of stable coins becoming a big use case now, is comically full circle for me. I started my career at Circle prior to the launch of USDC, and now I'm here at MoonPay, where stablecoins are now becoming the infrastructure for these really wonderful use cases that we're here at this conference to talk about. And so for me, what's fun about that is my role, I think, in my company or companies that I work at, is to be the biggest salesman of the company. And that might be weird to hear from a compliance person, but I mean that in a couple different ways. I think, one, internally, I am selling compliance to the business. I am explaining to them and getting them on board that, to Lindsay's point, compliance isn't this cost center in the back. It is a moat to your competitors. It is a sales forward need for your regulators and your banking partners. This is not something that is kind of do on the side of your desk. This is table stakes, and to get it right. And so for me, I'm an advocate internally, and my team are advocates internally to get ourselves involved with the business. We are also the first conversations, or often the first conversations with regulators, banking partners, or even business partners. There is a flight to quality, right? And so they want to make sure that the compliance program that we have running is something that is well thought out, well structured, and something they're familiar with. So I think that's a really important part of what we do. in helping the business thrive. And then I think we're also educators. You know, that education goes internally to our teams as to what we do, why it's important, but also with regulators as we move into a more decentralized world that is becoming more and more foreign from traditional finance, but solving the same problems. So how we do what we do to solve new risks using some tools that they're aware of and new tools that we have. So I think that's, you know, where my team and my role come in.
Thank you very much, Tom. So you've got two very important perspectives. Now let me turn it over to Larry.
Yeah. No, compliance, I would say, an enabler of trust and minimum requirements. And I'll kind of take you on a quick journey of just how we actually utilize compliance to get PayPal's blockchain and crypto unit off the ground. So starting off, you have this regulated fintech. Digital assets are not represented in the ecosystem. How do you do that? Okay, compliance. What is a regulatory regime that we can use as a baseline? Well, 4.5 years ago, quite sparse. Still sparse now, but you're seeing more in the world, and hopefully federal's coming. But okay, we'll go to the most conservative approach that we can, the most conservative regime that we can adhere to, and we'll use that as our baseline. Okay, New York had its Part 200, so we got a conditional bit license in order to launch our buy, hold, sell product, which did not interact on chain. So compliance, baby steps. As you move further out on the risk curve, you need more compliance because, to your point, it's about the story, whether it's to your board, whether it's to key third parties, and again, engaging with regulators. The story matters. So from there, we went from a conditional bit license to a full bit license when we wanted to launch transfers. So for the first time ever, which it was interesting, we were told we probably had less than a 2% chance of actually pulling this off because in the history of PayPal, it's always been a closed ecosystem. Never been able to open those walls. We were able to do that by having that bit license regime, leveraging best practices, and then from there, building this story of a risk-based approach that can be reperformed if there is testing involved, that can be unwound, so using tabletops, et cetera, consistently thinking of the what could go wrong, and kind of bringing along that journey. We were able to launch transfers with that bit license. Go further out, we launched the first regulated stablecoin by a major fintech, PYUSD. Our issuer is Paxos, limited purpose trust, which is probably a little bit of a step up from the bit license with the New York Department of Financial Services. We also got a limited purpose trust in addition to our bit license to be that, the brand behind it. So from there, now we can come and we're working with TradFis or key third parties and say the regulatory regime requires third-party attestations, a conservative reserve mix of cash, reverse repos, T-bills, et cetera. And we're able to kind of use compliance to tell this story of how we're going out on the risk curve, launching innovative products in a controlled manner that we have some baseline to adhere to. And from there, we also have a baseline for global expansion because at the end of the day, best practices are still best practices. So whether I'm talking to the MAS in Singapore or the FCA in the UK, yes, one might focus on, say, consumer duty a little bit more, and another may focus more on B2B. But ultimately, if you kind of build a solid foundation from a compliance perspective, it'll allow you to scale, grow, tell the story in a fairly safe manner.
Thank you, Larry, for that comprehensive view of going down several paths around the world of compliance. Okay, last but not least, Hussein.
Thank you, Anwar. Yeah, I think actually, honestly, the way we look at compliance is mainly, I guess, three themes in a sense. Like one would be the first, unfortunately, preconceived notion that this is mostly bad actors, illicit activity. So basically, you actually walk into a regulator, back to even Tom's point, assuming that like, yeah, this is crazy. Why would you bring in this like bad actors into this traditional finance and so forth, which is obviously, as you guys, obviously everybody in this room knows, it's a very bad idea to do illicit activity on chain kind of thing, because like everything is literally public at this point. And then I think the second two pieces would be back to the regulations, which I think actually, think of like USD in general, like speaking of like stable coins, like USD is a US property kind of thing. So even if you're doing whatever illicit or not activity, handling USD, this means you are within like US jurisdiction in a sense kind of thing. So that's also, how does this translate moving forward? Like being a company like USDT or like some other partners which like not even global, but ironically those guys are actually selling US debt to non-US customers, which is the best case scenario. That's also how even the US should play around with this like concept of USD on chain. And I think the third one would be the custody aspect of compliance. We even think of like PayPal back like literally from the 90s as well. When you put money in PayPal, it's like they are taking custody, quote unquote, of your money. You put money in a bank and whatever, like those guys are taking custody. But in this new scenario, what if it's self-custodial? So in this case, for example, Limited is complete self-custodial, so you're not really taking custody of your funds kind of thing. So how does that compliance move over to this kind of whole concept that Limited is not really taking your money or holding your funds, but we're going to move it on chain without being part of this flow of funds in a way, ironically as well. So I think those three are going to be interesting. And obviously seeing how compliance shape up, it would be amazing even like having this panel, honestly, I think it's more critical than we think now because there's not much, honestly, back to Tom's point, like, and Larry and Lindsay, not much already established at this point. So hopefully it doesn't also, for example, MiCA regulation on on USDC / USDT also was not the best idea that they did, given the economics doesn't even make any sense kind of thing. So I think also having regulations, back to your point, Anwar, of like being part of building this new era of fintech on chain would be really critical to make sure also it aligns all motivations plus economics plus obvious regulations as well.
Thank you very much, Hussein. So you've got this perspective on why it's important, right? And as we've seen in the financial services ecosystem, the role of compliance has grown dramatically over the last decade, right? So, and even in today's opening panel, the moderator asked about KYC AML. So the third question is a broad one, but it is very specific, and people can go down various paths in this, which is the money question. How are you doing best practices in compliance, and maybe with a focus on AML KYC as well? So Lindsay, you're on first again.
Okay, great. So I think, again, kind of the perspective that TaxBit has on this panel is we are focused on the software to help automate compliance, okay? Because as I mentioned, one of the surprising things for me going from Silicon Valley to a regulated financial institution was just the tremendous burden of compliance, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we all believe that we want the innovation to flourish, but we need to do it responsibly, right, within the confines. So we're very focused on how do we help all of these great innovators bring their products to market, serving consumers and businesses, but doing it in a manageable way, right? Where the teams don't have to take all of their resources to focus on the compliance, they can focus on the innovation, what they're primarily in service to. So in terms of the software and our approach to enabling compliance, right? Because, again, a lot of the use cases for digital assets and certainly for stablecoins is cross-border, multi-jurisdiction, right? Like 80% of our clients are in multiple regions. We are very focused on software that serves multiple regions, right? So you have compliance teams that can manage the Europe obligations, the US obligations, UK, LATAM, Africa, Middle East, et cetera. Right? And so that is a really important design principle of the compliance program, and I'd love to hear from our compliance officers here. But that's how we're approaching it from a software perspective, right? Is to make it more manageable and seamless. So that's one. I would say secondly is just, again, from a software or a systems perspective to enable the compliance, right? These things are rapidly evolving, right? Maybe not as rapidly as we all would like. But that's the thing is I think we're getting the initial frameworks put in place, but I'm sure that they are likely to evolve as well, right? And so having the flexible nature so that the compliance programs and the products and the delivery can adapt as we go. And then I would just say, the other important part as a service provider to all of these innovators is working very closely with the product and go-to-market teams of these leading players in the space so that we understand all the variety of use cases, right? As we know, we were talking a little bit backstage, stablecoins, I mean, even though that's one type of digital assets, there are still numerous use cases, right? And we have so many players in the ecosystem that are approaching it from different vantage points. So we try to work really closely with the product teams and the go-to-market teams of our clients what are they trying to do, right? So that we're building our software and our compliance so that it can still be a very good customer experience. I think everyone is very focused on that. How do they collect the information they need from customers, back to the KYC AML or the KYB, right? Do it in a lightweight way, but making sure that they have all that information that's very organized. And then just the last piece I would say, again, which is super important from our perspective, and again, I think our counterparts here on the stage too, is working very closely with the regulators, right? Educating them not only on kind of fundamentals of digital assets, but more importantly, we try to spend a lot of time on the pragmatic implementation and application of the rules, right? So what are we seeing our clients struggle with, right? What are we seeing in terms of the data, right, which is very messy? What are we seeing in terms of the risks or things that we've tried? A lot of these companies have been trying to do voluntary compliance, right? Even before rules were actually in place, they were showing kind of best attempt to comply and adopt best practices from traditional financial services or payments. And so what are some of those learnings, right? So we spend a lot of time on the pragmatic application of the rules and having that open dialogue. And I think that's just really important so that we get to a good framework that isn't as onerous as what banks have maybe had historically, but we take those lessons learned and apply it to this new innovation.
Lindsay, thank you very much for that very good overview on the how it's happening. Tom, over to you.
So I think very much to pick up on what Lindsay said, she enables us, we're enabling the business. And a big part of that is trust and being embedded with the product teams and the engineering teams. I think for me, one of the biggest shifts moving from traditional finance into fintech and crypto was I was working really, or am working really closely with product and engineering folks. It's a different language at times, right? And so a big part of what we do is build trust and education for our engineering and product teams who maybe haven't worked in a regulated financial institution. They're worried about building a product that works, that customer likes, that looks seamless and smooth and gets the job done. It's our job to help them do that in a compliant and regulatory forward way. But part of that is educating them as to why that matters, right? And sometimes that makes all the difference. And for me, that was a big learning curve in this space as I kind of grew was don't forget the why. And so a big part of what we do is not just say you have to do this because the regulation says so or because Tom says so. Do this because otherwise some really terrible people are going to do this with your product. And no engineer wants terrible people doing stuff with their product, right? So I think that's a big part, is really embedding ourselves with the product and engineering teams so that we'll be part of the design, down to what do the screens look like and what are the drop downs and where are the buttons, being involved there. So I think that is one very important part. Something that underpins that is the people. I think having the right compliance and risk people on your team is really important because it builds the trust. And it's a very vague statement, right? The right people. What do I mean by that? For my leadership team in particular, I hire people who have had experience in crypto before. Or if they haven't, they're a degen. They're using it day to day. They live in this space. And so for them, they understand what consumers are trying to do. They understand what engineers are trying to accomplish, but they also have their compliance hat on too. And so that allows us to speak more of the same language, that allows us to drink our own champagne and provide the right feedback on what we're seeing. So I think that's a very big part, surrounding myself with people who are experts in their compliance field, but also experienced in this space. The third side to that is, so we have at MoonPay, we have these block values that underpin our culture as a company. And one of them, it's my favorite one, is called Kaizen. And it is constant improvement. And as a company, you can see all that we're doing in the news. There's no slowing down. We are constantly evolving, improving every day. And we take that internally to all of our teams. And that is hugely important from a compliance standpoint as well, because every day we get a new challenge. And if we just said, well, this is what we have, we'll work it through this, that's going to stunt growth. That's going to lose trust. So for us, we build a really strong base. We plug, make sure we have all the basics of a program. And then we build those every day in a new way for the new products and services. How do we adapt them? How do we look at new vendors who are providing incredible solutions? We're looking at AI, where that can fit, how that can fit. And so that's an exciting journey to do. And so a lot of that is constantly growing and giving feedback to our vendors, working really closely with our vendors on, hey, this is working, this isn't, or here's a new problem we're seeing. Can you help us with that? The vendors, vendors like TaxBit and the great vendors that we get to work with want to innovate with us too, right? So that is a big part of what we work with, and ties into the type of people you need who are willing to kind of make changes and grow.
Thank you, Tom. And one of the things that was very interesting amongst many others was you talked about responsibility and morality, not just following regulation because of the need to do so, right?
I think just if I could add one thing on that, I won't name names, but a former regulator that I met once, and obviously we talk about how there could be more regulation in this space, there's hopefully more coming, but sometimes the rules, you don't know the rules. And I spoke on a panel with him, and it was just this powerful line that sticks with me all the time. And it was, if you don't know the rules, you do know the right thing to do. So if you do the right thing, the worst that's gonna happen is a foot fault and a technicality, and that's way better than morally doing the wrong thing. And I think that's been a really good guidepost for me in my career.
Very helpful. Before I turn it over to Larry, you just triggered an event around the same space for me to just describe to the group. Very different context. It was on FX Hirschstat settlement risk. I know, a very geeky issue. But at a panel at a SWIFT meeting, a gentleman named Larry Sweet, regulator at the Fed, everybody was giving him a hard time. So what kind of risk should we manage? How should we manage it? Net, multilateral, . And Larry goes, you brought this risk into this world. You take it out. And I quote that as well, because that's the essence of it, managing risk, managing the right thing to do. So with that, over to you,
Oh, yeah.
Larry.
That was fantastic. I would kind of say, well, I was fortunate in that when PayPal established the blockchain group, it was a startup within PayPal. And I was employee one on the leadership team to build out the risk and compliance function. So I got to kind of work with a blank slate, but leverage all of the, infrastructure that PayPal has built over the last 20 years. And as we continue to build out our suite of products, there are kind of two principles I focused on. One, and it kind of gets to what you said, there's this historical approach of compliance professionals to start with no. And I think especially when you're working in an innovative space, you got to flip that. So to me, when I'm working with product engineering, et cetera, it's how do we get to yes? And if we cannot get to yes, we can confidently stand on our no. And it is a very different approach because now it breeds trust. They know Larry and his team are trying to enable us. So if they are saying, hey, we can't do this, there is a real reason why, because they have figured out ways for us to do things that we didn't necessarily think we could. So that's one principle. The other is something I've kind of created called my zip code method, right? So it's interesting. There's a spectrum where you have maybe native crypto firms where it's, hey, throw everything out the window. It's all new. Let's just start fresh, right? Then you'll have TradFis where it's, hey, we've done this all before. Fit all of this in there. And really, it's kind of a middle, I found, where it's, guess what? There are tried and true principles and best practices that all of the blow-ups and situations that have occurred over all these years, you can leverage. And that's about 80%, believe it or not. So my zip code method is, I'm just trying to figure out from the beginning, what zip code are we in from a best practice perspective, from a regulatory regime perspective. And then we spend the rest of our time, that 20%, trying to find the actual address, right? So real example here. You're going to launch the transfers product. So take BSA, AML, sanctions, all that good stuff. You need to have step-ups in provisioning on the KYC side for the customers. Now that you're interacting with the public blockchain, you have to think of things such as travel rule, blacklist, sanction screening on wallet addresses, all of these just various things that are kind of table stakes from a global financial crimes perspective. Here's something that's in the 20%, that was a true tail scenario that we never had encountered at PayPal. We listed Ethereum, but we didn't have any ERC20s. In theory, you could send an ERC20 on the Ethereum chain to an Ethereum wallet address, but we don't support that token. Boom. That is something that is net new, inherent risk that you have to figure out how to manage. Some things you have to kind of contain because ultimately, maybe we aren't even there from an innovation perspective to be able to adhere to some of these things. But having that zip code method allows us to really focus our energy on the 20%, work with all of our coverage area teams to make sure that we're consistently bringing in best practices from customer service, engineering, financial crime, InfoSec, et cetera, enhancing that with each new launch. And then again, just really dialing in on those unique aspects as we move further out on the risk curve.
Thank you so much for going deep into that and giving us a great example as well, Eric. So, Hossein, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think honestly, amazing. Honestly, thanks. You got all the three incredible points. I think the way that we look at it, also back to your point, more of like how it's technically identity and transactions in a sense, or like at the end of the day. And then I think back to Tom and Larry and Lindsay, like translating the two words to each other in a sense. So for example, to make it easy for us even to convince regulators and bank partners, like, hey, we invented like brands called limited gold verified, which means like, by the way, I'm not gonna touch Larry's raise or Tom's raise or Lindy's raise without having KYC, KYB done for this person. And now it's clear for everybody. If you have this like limited gold check mark, this means this person did KYC and KYB. Obviously, back to the crypto folks, it's like, what do you mean I need to do KYC to get an account? Like, why would I do that? So obviously, that's like a pushback on that side. But then obviously on the other side, like, yeah, if you're gonna touch banks, touch rails, you have to be doing KYC, KYB. Again, back to your point, Steve and Tom, like the lingo itself is different. When you say permissioned and permissionless, like when you talk to a banker or regulator, it's like, what do you mean permissioned and permissionless? So obviously for them, like, yeah, are you gonna do KYC, KYB or not? Obviously, we want you to do it. And the transaction side, back to your point, Larry, of like having money traveling on TradFi rails and then money traveling on chain. So if you're gonna let coins end up on traditional rails, so that you actually do your, back to doing the right thing as well, on chain as well. So obviously, like, yeah, if somebody's gonna move money from a contaminated wallet, if you will, back to like your good wallet, which is like in your kind of custody / KYC, this is also, we didn't really do the right thing because we didn't even check on the, like what happened on chain before this money made it like off chain in a sense. So I think honestly, back to your point, I think splitting it clearly between like, hey, here is how traditional rails work in a sense and expectations to work. Like obviously you need to trace the money, be able to see who did what in a sense, and then try to do that like basically on the identity and the transaction level. And obviously transactions comes at the point like what's on chain versus off chain as well. And even actually, even at Tom's point, the on chain checks in a sense actually honestly wasn't even regulated in a sense because like nobody's really asking you to do it in a sense kind of thing. But they're gonna obviously afraid that you're gonna bring money from like the on-chain world to traditional rails. It's like, yeah, but how do you guys can guarantee this? It's like, yeah, there are actually tools out there that can do a full investigation, like how did this money come from blacklisted wallets, blacklisted addressees, like basically contaminated wallets along the way. So that's kind of way back to like the amazing panel here saying like, yeah, actually you can do the right thing if you just try to basically map out the whole thing from identity, transactions, on-chain, off-chain, to make sure that you are basically, back to the point, and you are like not letting risk in the door to start with. Because back to Tom and Larry as well, you don't really want to have a business with bad actors and doing like leveraging a product. If anything, to build sustainable large business like all of us are trying to do here, we just want to do literally the right thing, back to what you guys are saying as well.
Thank you, Hussein. So we've got this incredibly talented group that's given a perspective on how, right? And in the last few minutes, one of the things that we think about here is, having gone through what they do, what's important, how they do it, is what is the one single opportunity that you wish that either you or the industry, so it's very broad, could create? What is the one biggest thing you wish the industry or you could create to make this scalable? So that we'd be sitting here with success 2 years from now, right? And then not to make it too easy. And what is the one thing you fear most that you have to manage to, right? And so let's give everybody a couple of minutes, and we will not go with the order because then you'll be stuck first without
Yes,
a
exactly.
warning. Let's see who wants to take that first. Anybody?
I'll go.
Larry?
So, okay, what would I love to see? I would really love to see federal regulations around stablecoins. Obviously, market infrastructure as well, but we're at Stablecon here. Just because you really need clear rules of the road in order to scale, to grow, to build that trust, and really to take this to the promise that it can be. So regulations would be great there. As far as use cases, again, just feel very fortunate where I'm at, and we have a two-sided network of over 400 million wallets in 200 countries. So I get to see a lot, and you get to see all the pain points. So, this was in the news, a couple months ago where we've piloted with Yellow Card and Cubana, two of our disbursement partners in our cross-border payments business, settling with the PYUSD stablecoin. Well, when you think about it, when you're settling with a disbursement partner in the Philippines, you are sending a wire, you're pre-funding, you have the issue of nights, weekends, and holidays. So it's expensive, it's slow, fairly inefficient, and it just really doesn't scale and provide the value to customers that it can, that they really deserve. So utilizing a stablecoin, it's near real-time settlement, less pre-funding. You send it on, for example, PYUSDs on Solana. That chain cents. That dramatically improves the settlement with our disbursement partner, and then we can pass on the savings to the customer. So just being able to, one, help improve the pipes, key. Two, there was a use case we had where there was a young lady who owned a coffee shop in Brooklyn, and she sourced her beans from sub-Saharan Africa. And she was telling us just about the pain point she has just with being able to pay her actual, sourcers there. We were able to kind of pilot a situation where she was able to utilize PYUSD and able to actually settle. And again, that friction was able to reduce. So being able to increase the velocity of transactions and value transfer and thus help people and democratize value, for lack of better words, that's a lot of the promise I see, and I'm really excited about that.
Thank you so much, Larry, for that. Anybody else wants to take on this question?
Yeah.
Go for it. No?
All right. One of the things that I'm most excited about, as I mentioned earlier, again, there's so much power to unlock with the technology, but we really have to have the largest players adopting it, not just the great smaller innovators, right? So I do think there's a real opportunity for kind of the partnership. But I would love to see, again, the multinationals, right, doing treasury management, right, like payments at large scale. With stablecoins, there's some may opt for tokenized deposits. There's different forms of it, but that's when I feel like you have the real unlock. And so I think we're in the very early innings. Again, very large players like dipping their toe in the water. But I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about. Again, to truly like modernize the financial infrastructure and payment rails, and then we can talk separately about the biggest risks. But
Yeah, I think. One, I think I'm going to steal the zip code method. I like that. I like that a lot. It's so accurate. But I think from a use case perspective, I think what's really exciting and part of the reason, part of what I love about MoonPay is the use of non-custodial wallets and simplifying that use case for the larger consumer base. And so helping to democratize payments, allow people to have these non-custodial wallets that they can use at lots of different places at scale to pay, to remit, cross-border, all of that, but kind of control it themselves. And I think that one of the exciting parts right now for me as a compliance officer is I think a lot of our regulators and banking partners have gotten comfortable with the centralized custodial model, and now we've kind of thrown this new one at them. And so working with them to kind of understand the risks and actually the improved controls there is kind of fun and interesting, but I think that has a lot of growth potential, and I think is one of the exciting things about MoonPay and kind of what we're trying to do. I think if I maybe like double down on the compliance nerdship, I think passportable KYC is something that could make things really interesting. We all work with business people. They hate customers having to do KYC, it's friction, and every customer is doing it at every place that they're doing it. So how do we, passport that KYC so that customers don't have to do this over and over and over again, whether that's a business or a person like all of you. I think the non-custodial aspect can play into this a lot, and kind of infrastructure companies like MoonPay who have 30 million KYC users, and there are, I think, some interesting use cases there, but I think from like a scaling perspective, that could be really exciting as well.
Thank you. Hossein?
Yeah, thank you. I think actually, honestly, especially think of compliance from perspective of compliance, it's going to be interesting to see also, I think we need compliance quickly to make sure even like the banks and the regulators can get on board and with what we're doing in a sense, because if it's not really regulated, they're not going to touch it, as you guys obviously know as well. And that's like, I can't really, there's no clarity here. And I think also it's overwhelming to see how many things need to be regulated, from the yield on the coin itself, like the deposits on the coin, the regulation, where are those deposits being held, regulated, audited, and so forth, to KYC, KYB transactions. And I think also, it used to be the US has the upper hand to decide what happens kind of thing. I think in this case now, being natively global as like on-chain, like a MiCA regulation, for example, the USDT got delisted, which is like a $200 billion like behemoth kind of thing, just because, EU decided like, hey, you need to hold deposits in the EU. It's like, you're off the market kind of thing. So I think that's kind of, it's going to be interesting. I think also speaking of Yanwar as well, being on Swift, of like how you guys did it at that level globally to bring all these countries together to decide how to run this globally. And even like to Tom's point, like it's obviously brutal to have KYC done in every single widget / like jump you're doing across that chain. And I think obviously the downside would be if we over-regulate, which is, I guess like the current administration, like I think J.D. Vance is like deregulated everything, I guess like 2 days ago or so. But I think also, obviously, it did hurt us in banking, where, for example, like the 36% interest cap, it led to like basically the payday loans and all this stuff, because like how it got regulated to the point, it's actually hurting the consumers, not helping them. So I think just like hopefully this time around we regulate to the point where actually it helps everybody involved kind of thing, without getting, unfortunately, over-regulated to the point actually it starts hurting even the actual customers we're trying to help in the first place as well. I think the opportunity, I think to everybody, like said here as well, I think self-custody, obviously to Larry's point, like having money, traveling, no offense to Swift also, over like 5 business days or something, versus like this shows up immediately on real time. On the other side, obviously, even for example, in our case, I need to pre-fund, to Larry's point, if I can get a T+7 wait for until the Swift arrives on the other side, nobody's gonna give me T+7, but T+1, even like half an hour or so, like, the money shows up there. So it changes the whole game from settlement perspective as well on that side. So a lot of amazing opportunities across the whole chain of deposits to yield, to regulation, to obviously connect identity. And I think to Tom's point, honestly, if we get to the point that there is an identity provider, honestly, with NFTs as well, it could be like, is this NFTs issued by a body, even like a MoonPay or something like MoonPay have that, how many identities now? If it's coming from a MoonPay NFT, that now we actually understand exactly that this identity has been vetted before by somebody we trust. Because I think also in fintech, being part of that era as well, there was like a few actually, honestly, not intentional or not intentional, I think they were like, hey, like there's business here, let's do it. And obviously it backfires to all of us again, like if somebody does something bad to the space. So fortunately, hopefully, like you guys, as the big guys come in as well, make sure that this actually is run properly, there's no really bad actors let in, the risk is managed accordingly. It's gonna also not backfire with over-regulation to counteract bad actors or like basically out of lack of knowledge in a sense that actually did something that, I mean, like screwed us all over as well, no offense in a sense.
Thank you, Hussein. So in the last 90 seconds, one takeaway thought each for the audience from each of you.
I would just say, again, underscoring the importance of compliance on all of this. I loved Larry's point around the get to yes. I think one of the biggest risks to unlocking the potential of stablecoin and digital assets is that there is an over-conservatism. And so again, that's why helping the product teams, helping the businesses really understand that path to compliance in an innovative way and getting to yes, I think is super important.
Thank you.
I think in the context of compliance, get to know your products and services. I think that is an important, it's easy to get lost in the weeds of your day-to-day compliance, but understanding what consumers are trying to do and what your products and services are trying to accomplish, I think makes you a better partner in this
Thank
space.
you, Tom. Larry?
Yeah, I'm just extremely excited about the whole ecosystem. The current iteration of the internet democratized information. This Web3 initiative is democratizing value. Stablecoins are kind of the initial killer app of Web3. So overall, I'm just really excited about what does that mean for society in general as we continue to mature.
Thank you. Hassan, you have the last word in the last 10 seconds.
It's like too much pressure. No, I think actually honestly, like hard to follow those guys, like amazing comments. I think honestly, like yeah, back to Larry's point, I think the opportunity of doing the right thing, back to what Tom was saying, I think they enable us to serve the right customers properly, because obviously all of us want to actually serve the right customers to get them access to good products. So I think actually honestly having compliance to manage that integration so we can actually serve them well and not basically backfire and basically just like lock it down because of the bad actors, and now the good actors are actually unable to get access to business remittances, transfers, and settlement. That's be super exciting actually of like how can we get this middle point of like integrating things enough to make sure like yeah we can offer those services to the intended reasons for them to exist.
Great, thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to our talented panelists.